Hi, all. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to wait just a couple minutes to allow everyone to get settled before we get started. So thank you again so much for joining us tonight. Looks like we have a couple more people that are waiting to get in. Wow, great. We have a big flood of folks coming. That's excellent. We're just going to wait maybe 30 more seconds here. Make sure everyone that is trying to get on, get situated and connected before we get started. Thanks again for your patience. Okay. I think everyone that is hoping to join us is now on and has access to their computers. Just going to note real quick that you're here for the fourth workshop for the Corte Madera housing series. And we're really excited to see you here tonight. My name is Dave Job with Plan to Place. And before we get started, I'm going to hand it over to Adam Wolf to get us going. Adam, I think you might be muted. There you
go. Thanks. Apologies about that. Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. My name's Adam Wolf. I'm the Director of Planning and Building for the town of Corte Madera. Thanks again to everyone who is here participating this evening and who has been with us through the last several months, participating in past workshops. You can see, Dave, if you go to the next slide here, you can see we're at our fourth workshop of our housing element workshop series. And really the previous workshops have provided a great foundation for what we'll be discussing tonight. At our previous workshops, we've had some great discussions that have helped identify some of the most critical housing issues and needs in Corte Madera, including the need for a mix of housing types and affordability levels. We've also discussed specific sites and locations where we might address these issues and needs by planning for new housing development. We've heard from many people in our community, including the Corte Madera Larkspur Schools District Superintendent and the President of the Corte Madera Chamber of Commerce, about the important role that housing for staff and employees plays in ensuring we continue to attract high quality teachers and a diverse array of really successful businesses. We've heard from the water district staff and their water efficiency manager about how they plan for new housing development in their long range planning. And we've also heard from market rate and affordable housing developers about the need for housing in the Bay Area at all income levels to ensure we're meeting demand, greening our housing stock, and really welcoming people of all socioeconomic backgrounds. We've also heard directly from Corte Madera property owners about how housing development can be a central part of their redevelopment plans and their vision for their own properties going forward, and for reinvesting in their aging properties that are already in their aging properties that are ready for reinvestment. And we really purposely try to drive a conversation that focuses on Corte Madera's vision for addressing regional and local housing needs while promoting reinvestment, property improvements, and economic development in town. These discussions that we've had at our prior workshops with your participation have given us a great foundation on which to begin this next part of the workshop series, where we'll now need to turn to the hard task and turn our attention to state housing laws, namely RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And we're going to have to overlay that on top of our process. This is really the 700 plus units we promised we'd get to. We're here tonight, and we're going to delve into how we ensure we meet the town's obligations to comply with state law and achieve a compliant housing element. Meeting this state RHNA requirement is going to be the focus of the next 2 workshops. And these workshops will lead directly to proposals for significant changes to the regulations that govern how much housing and how big buildings can be on specific properties in town. So these are really important meetings and workshops to help us and help staff develop these proposals. And we really thank you for being here and participating. I'm going to do my monthly plug for our website. If you've missed any of our previous workshops, you can always catch up by visiting our website, cortemaderahousing.org. You can watch previous presentations, access a ton of other good information. We usually have feedback forms post workshops to basically get your post workshop comments to us on the most recent information we're providing. And so there's a ton of other good information about the housing element, the housing planning process. So without further ado, I think we have a great workshop for you tonight. If we go to the next slide, we'll just touch on the agenda for tonight. We just did, well, first we're going to hear from Christine O'Rourke. Christine O'Rourke from O'Rourke and Associates. I've introduced her fully at past workshops, so I'm not going to do so again, but Christine has helped the town with prior housing element, and I've worked with Christine on climate action plans and whatnot for the town. So Christine's going to help lead a discussion and a presentation regarding the RHNA requirement and site inventory guidelines. I'm going to come back to you all and talk about the draft site inventory plan and how we as staff have gone about sort of figuring out how to plan for these 700 plus units. And then we're going to hear from you in breakout groups. And as part of that, we have the assistance and help from other staff, Martha Battaglia, senior planner with the town of Corte Madera. We have Tracy Haggerty, assistant planner, town of Corte Madera, Phil Boyle, senior planner, town of Corte Madera, and also Paul Kronzer with Plan to Place, as well as Dave Javits as well, who will help us throughout the meeting. So I think next steps, we're on to our facilitation guidelines here. Dave.
Yeah, I'll take it over here real quick. So before we dive into it, as Adam mentioned, the core of the reason we're here tonight is one, to share information, but really as equally as important, if not more importantly, is to hear from you all. And how we're going to do that is through a facilitated discussion, mainly through the small group exercise. And this is just a quick reminder of how we're going to do that through a hand raised feature when we get in those small groups. You can either access that through your participant window and or through the reactions button, depending on what version of Zoom you're using. But then throughout the meeting, you'll have the opportunity to actually chat any questions or comments to us through the chat bubble, and we'll practice that together here in a second. And we'll have a pause after Christine's presentation to take a couple of those quick comments and see if we can answer any of those questions. But most importantly, we'll actually take all those questions and put them into the summary of the meeting itself and answer what we can there as well. So just wanted to note that real quick before we launch into it. And what we always do for all of these meetings are some poll questions. It's really to get a sense of who we're speaking to, who we're reaching, and equally as importantly, who we're not, so that we continue to course correct throughout this process to make sure that we're reaching diverse perspectives throughout the town and make sure everyone has an opportunity to contribute. So what you just saw pop up on your screen now are some of those basic demographic questions that, again, we ask at every single touch point with the community, referencing where you live, where you work, why you decided to join us this evening, your personal housing situation, the housing type you might live in, and then typical demographic questions of age, ethnicity, and income. So if you can take a second and indulge us in answering those questions, hopefully those are all up on your screen currently. Maybe we'll give you all another 30 seconds or so to work your way through those questions. I see it's starting to tabulate here now. And fantastic to see that we have well over 35 folks or so from the town that are joining us here tonight. Hopefully more will join as we work our way through the evening. So we'll wait maybe another 20 seconds here. I know there's quite a few questions, so I want to give you time to be able to answer them. And then once you do finish your answers, I will then go ahead and share out the results for you all to be able to see again who's joining us. And then these results will be taken and put into the summary as well, so that we have a good recording of who we spoke to. If for some reason you don't get a chance to access a demographics, no problem at all. You could definitely let us know and we can get that information either during or after the meeting as well. Looks like a little bit more than a half of you have now submitted your responses. Maybe we'll give you another 10, 15 seconds here. And the next thing we're going to do, just to queue up, is we're going to do a quick exercise through chat just to make sure that you all are comfortable using that as well. And I did see a question come through, Adam, I'm glad you mentioned it, about where all the recordings for the meetings are. I'll just reiterate that if you didn't get a chance to join us at any of the previous meetings, they're all posted to Corte Madera housing.org, and I put that in chat as well if you need to access that. Okay, I think I've stalled long enough, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. Looks like we got a vast majority of you that did take the poll. I'm going to share out the results real quick. You should see that pop up on your screen now. Obviously, it looks like majority of you live in Corte Madera as expected. A split between work in Corte Madera or outside, or not work at all currently. We do have most of you, obviously, you're here to learn about the housing element update process as expected. Vast majority of you own a home, and it's either a house or a duplex. Great, and a good range of ages represented as well. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now. And again, these results will be posted along with the summary that will come out after the meeting. So one thing that I love the town does, and this was Martha's idea, and I always think it's really fun, is for everyone to drop a quick comment in chat just to make sure you all have access to it, providing us with one word you would use to describe living or working in Corte Madera. So if you can drop that answer in chat, and we're not going to spend the time to review them all now, but that'll give us something to kind of take a look at and remind us all of why we love living in Marin and or the town of Corte Madera. So with that, as Adam mentioned, I'm now going to hand it over to Christine to get us started. Christine, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So I am going to talk about Corte Madera's Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, and then I'll also talk about state housing law and the guidelines that we get from the State Department of Housing and Community Development that guides the process that we use to select sites and to identify the sites that are appropriate to accommodate our RHNA at the different income levels. So may I have the next slide, please? And one more, okay. So we have talked about the various housing element requirements in previous workshops, so I won't spend a lot of time right now going through this, but just to note that what we're talking about tonight really is focused on the site inventory. And so all of these requirements are enshrined in state law. State law changes every year. It seems that the state legislature is passing additional laws. There was an important one that was passed back in 2018. It's Assembly Bill 686. And essentially it is about the housing element that it has to address and promote and affirmatively further fair housing. So that affects how we do outreach to our communities to make sure that we are reaching some of the more underrepresented populations. It also impacts how we analyze the sites. We want to be sure that we're not furthering any desegregation patterns in the community. And as you'll see, it has a big impact on how the RHNA methodology was developed and how RHNA was allocated to the local governments. Next slide, please. So as I said, there's state law that really dictates this process. It starts at the State Department of Housing and Community Development, which determines the regional need for the region and then gives that large number to the Council of Governments for each region in California. Our Council of Government is called the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG for short. And then ABAG, the board, appoints a housing methodology committee that goes through a long process to determine what the methodology is and how it's going to address the state law objectives for RHNA, which are listed here. Essentially, it's about increasing the housing supply, having a mix of housing types. So we have multifamily as well as single family units, promoting infill so that we're not continuing to go out to greenfields to develop more housing, improving the interregional jobs housing relationship. That's really about, like, if a community has a lot of low wage jobs, that it also has enough affordable housing that is affordable to those low income households. And again, affirmatively furthering fair housing. Next slide. And so that phrase, affirmatively furthering fair housing, is defined in state law. Specifically, what it really means is this idea of taking meaningful actions that address significant disparities in housing needs, and as well as access to opportunity. So the idea here is that across the region, we're replacing segregated living patterns with more balanced living patterns, and then transforming any areas that are racially or ethnically concentrated, and kind of just having a more balanced and diverse communities all across the Bay Area region. Next slide. So the regional housing needs allocation is for the entire cycle. It's an 8-year cycle. So the cycle that we're embarking on starts in 2023 and it will go for 8 years to 2031. And the region's need is more than double what it was for the last housing element cycle. So the whole Bay Area has over 441,000 units that we need to plan for over the next 8 years. Marin County has 13,500 units that it has to plan for, and then Corte Madera was allocated 725 units. Next slide. May I have the next slide, please? Okay, thanks. So this is a look at the RHNA allocation over the years. RHNA's been required as a part of housing elements for 6 cycles now, going back all the way to 1980, when the housing allocation was just about as high as it is for this housing element cycle. And then you can see it kind of went down from there. It was the lowest it was last cycle at 72 units. So what we are dealing with this time around is a 10-fold increase over the last cycle. This is true for all of the other communities in Marin County. It's not 10-fold for every community, but every community had significant gains in their RHNA allocation. And that's really true for all of the affluent communities around the Bay Area. Next slide. So here we're looking at the actual units that were built compared to what the RHNA was required. And we don't have data, or I should say we don't have very reliable data going back for those first 3 housing element cycles. So we've just left them blank. Doesn't mean that there was no housing that was developed then. But we really want to show you that, first of all, RHNA is the idea in the housing element cycle is that we are making sure that there is enough land that is appropriately zoned and can accommodate additional housing that's affordable to all these different income levels. It does not mean that the town is required to build any housing or finance housing, although a lot of local governments do have like a housing trust fund that may have some money that can be put towards affordable housing. But essentially, it really is the market that is going to determine how much housing will be built. It's up to the property owners, it's up to developers, and it's up to market demand. So back in 2007, although the RHNA was for 244 units, only 83 units were built during that period. The last housing element cycle, 72 units were required, but the town actually built 272 units and really far exceeded that number. That does include the 180 units that were built at Tam Ridge, as well as some multifamily and single family homes and accessory dwelling units. And then, so for this housing element cycle, 725 units, we really don't know how many units will actually be built. Now, the RHNA is going to be broken up into the different income categories. The income categories, the important thing to remember about this is that it's really dependent on what the median income is for the county. The median income is different for all counties. As you might imagine, the median for Marin County is higher than many of the other counties in California. And so the median income also, it depends on the size of the household. So I've got two representative sizes here, a 2-person household and a 4-person household. So a 2-person household median income is almost 120,000. And it's almost 149 or almost 150,000 for a 4-person household. And so the very low, low, moderate is all defined around that median. So low income is 50 to 80% of median income. Very low income is up to 50%. So a 2-person household income that's considered very low income could make up to $73,000. So we're not talking about something like the federal poverty line. We're really talking about at 73,000, 2 people who are working, entry-level positions, people who are working on lower skilled jobs could easily be making $73,000 here in Marin County. So just something to keep in mind. May I have the next slide, please? So this is how RHNA is broken down by the different various income categories in Corte Madera. The very low and low, you'll hear that we refer to this sometimes as lower income, and we're grouping both of those together. And that's because a lot of the guidelines that we get are about what's appropriate for sites that accommodate lower income households. So that's roughly 336 units there. And then moderate and above moderate. Above moderate is usually addressed just through the market. And so market rate housing is affordable to above moderate income households. But very low and low usually need some kind of subsidized housing to be sure that it's affordable to those income categories. Next slide. All right, so very quickly, I just wanted to touch on what the methodology is that was used to determine RHNA for this cycle. And so the methodology started with the Planned Bay Area 2050 growth projection. So that's looking at what was assumed would be growth in population and jobs around the Bay Area. And then that number was modified by 3 factors. 2 of them are about job proximity. So how quickly can you get to your job or the jobs that are in the area via automobiles and transit. And Corte Madera scored pretty low on those factors. And then the next one is access to high opportunity areas. And Corte Madera actually scored very high on that. So this map here is showing you what the highest resource areas are. Those are in the darkest blue. And then high resource is the next shade of blue. So what is a high resource area? It's an area that has low poverty rates. It has very good educational systems, high educational outputs. It has higher wage jobs, low unemployment, and access to positive environmental factors and low pollution rates. So all of those, which describes Corte Madera. So the methodology really used this idea in order to kind of pursue that affirmatively furthering fair housing concept and help to move, it really directed more of the housing to these high resource areas in an effort to create more balanced and diverse communities across the entire Bay Area region. Next slide. So next, I just will kind of go into some of the state laws and the HCD guidelines, as I said, that dictate how we address RHNA and identify sites to address and be sure that we have capacity for all of our housing needs at the various income levels. Next slide. So again, the site inventory is required as part of the housing element. And we have to identify sites to accommodate the RHNA requirement at each income category. So the site inventory itself is very detailed. We have to identify the capacity or the number of units that can be accommodated, that could be built on each site. We also have to identify any environmental constraints as well as development constraints that could limit the number of units that are built. And we have to identify how many of those units would be developed at each income category. Now, the important thing here to remember is that this inventory, although we're going through a lot of work to develop this inventory and to meet the HCD guidelines and state laws, once we have a draft element, we must submit it to HCD, and then it goes through a review process. And so HCD could tell us that some of those sites are not adequate and that they don't meet state law, in which case we may need to go back and revise the inventory. Next slide, please. So let's talk about single family homes first. And of course, when we're talking about single family homes, we're talking about new construction only, not tear downs and rebuilds, because that's just a replacement home. Typically, when we're talking about new single family homes, we're just looking at the number of single family vacant lots, of which Corte Madera has very few, maybe 5 lots are still left and haven't been developed. We do have this new law that was passed. It went into effect just on January 1st of this year, called Senate Bill or SB 9. And essentially SB 9 allows any single family lot to be split, and then for 2 homes to be built on each of those lots. So you could theoretically have a single family home lot that ends up having 4 units or 3 additional units. And so there's a number of regulations and caveats to this law, but so there is a potential here for us to count more units for single family homes, but since the law is new and we haven't gotten any guidance from HCD yet about how to apply SB 9, we're being a very conservative and assuming kind of a low end of single family homes could be developed using this law. So we just don't know for sure at this point how many units we could potentially credit for single family homes using SB 9. And thank you. The next thing is accessory dwelling units, which are also called second units. And for this, we do have pretty good guidance from HCD, which says that we need to be looking at the historical production of ADUs in the community, and then using that to project the number of units that will be developed in the future. Now, there were some new ADU regulations, state laws that went into effect in the past couple of years. So you see here, like in 2021, the number of units made a pretty big jump from 4 to 18, and that is due to both probably the new laws, as well as there were these 8 ADUs that were built at the residences at the preserve. So we're thinking kind of conservatively that we probably will be able to count somewhere between 80 and 100 ADUs towards the RHNA. That is probably 10 to 12 units per year. And so that's another way that we can address our RHNA numbers through ADUs. Next slide. So the bulk of the numbers, however, are going to come down to sites that are multifamily sites. And these are sites that we can use to accommodate the lower income housing need, as well as any unmet need that for the moderate and above moderate income levels. So in order to qualify as a site for a lower income housing need, state law says that our sites have to be at least 20 units per acre. Kind of a good example of that is like a 2, 2.5, 3-story multifamily building. It really depends on the site characteristics, the size of the units, but that's generally what you get at about 20 units per acre. The site needs to be at least 1/2 acre. And of course, HCD prefers vacant sites. Now, there's really no vacant sites in Corte Madera, which is true for most of the other communities in the county as well. So if non-vacant sites are used, then there's a higher bar, and the town has to provide substantial evidence in the record that the existing use will likely be discontinued during the planning period, and that housing will be built. So substantial evidence, what does that mean? It could include like leases are expiring early enough in the planning period so that development would be possible. So if we have long-term leases that go to 2030, those sites are probably not viable. If the building is dilapidated, it needs to be torn down and replaced. It's a very old building. It's just no longer functionally useful. Those are all good reasons to include them as a potential site for housing. There could be an existing development agreement to redevelop the site, so that would be substantial evidence. And then also, and this has a lot of weight with HCD, is that the property owner actually provides a letter stating their intention to develop the property with residences during the planning period. Next slide. So kind of as a quick recap, the 3 different strategies that I've just gone over to how to meet the RHNA. Single family homes, again, market rate, those would be affordable to above moderate income households. And so we're looking at 10, it could be higher than that. We'll find out hopefully in the next month or 2, we'll get some guidance from HCD about how to apply SB 9. Accessory dwelling units can be affordable. We're doing, there's a survey that's in process right now to really determine the affordability of these. We have found in the past that they can be affordable to lower, moderate, and above moderate income households. We're looking at somewhere between 80 and 100 units that we think we can count for ADUs. And then multifamily units, which is really what we're going to be talking about tonight, where we can have multifamily housing. Those can be used to address housing need at all income levels. And we're really looking at, the balance of that to get us to 725 is about 625 units. It is helpful to have a little bit of a cushion here. There's something called the no net loss rule. I really don't want to get too far into that, but essentially what it means is that as the years go on and the town approves the housing development, if it takes off one of those sites and then what's left over is there's not enough sites available to accommodate the lower housing need, then the town would have to at the same time identify another site and make sure that that is zoned properly in order to make up that shortfall. So it's very helpful to actually have some additional sites on the inventory that can be used in case that happens. And then there's also the potential that we may not have, that HCD doesn't accept all of the sites that we end up putting into the housing element. So if we have some additional sites, then we have a little bit of cushion there as well. So now I think we want to stop and answer some of your questions through the chat.
Yes, thank you so much, Christine, for that great presentation. Adam and Martha have been doing a fantastic job keeping up with a lot of great questions that you all have been asking about Christine's presentation. I'm just trying to keep up here to see what was answered. I think we've answered most of them. Adam, is there any that you'd like to highlight real quick before we move forward?
Well, it seems like there's a lot of questions about the actual RHNA, ABAG, and so on. I think I've tried to address most of those in the chat. There's some SB 9 questions. There's one question about construction already going on count. So at the preserve, just real quickly on that, we are counting that for this. It's being built now in this current cycle. We're in the 5th cycle, so our 2014 to 22 cycle. So those units certainly are being counted. And those were our 16 rental homes, with half of them, so 8 of those will have accessory dwelling units in there. And I think Martha did a great job of answering the question about affordability and how many of those were in the last cycle were affordable. I really appreciate all the questions. I would just also state that we would love, we're available for reaching out, for having conversations outside of this venue with you directly by phone, if you're comfortable in sort of a distance way, in person, whatever it is. We would love to talk further about and answer some of these detailed questions and some of the history. We can go on for a while on this stuff, so it's hard to answer in really succinct chat format, but I appreciate all your thoughtful comments and questions here.
Yeah, thank you for that, Adam. And yeah, you will see a bunch of responses. We'll try to respond to more during the summary as well, those that we can't answer. But thank you for all these great questions. And there'll be an opportunity. We have a lot to cover in the small groups, so there'll be an opportunity to have those conversations in the small groups as well, depending on timing. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for your patience and great questions.
All right, so we're gonna shift now, and thanks, Christine. Really, I mean, it's really critical background as we now start to talk about a draft site inventory plan. Like, how are we going to do this? We understand it's challenging, but really the focus of the rest of the workshop is about deciding where to plan for the more than 625 multifamily units that Christine talked about at on her last slide. Unfortunately, we're not starting from scratch. We've had several workshops, and we really started that work at our last workshop, where we started to identify potential housing opportunity sites through a planning framework. And we described that planning framework. I think it's important, so I'm going to mention it again. Really intended to achieve the following goals. So if we're going to have to plan for additional housing units, where should we do so, and on what basis should we start to can we think about appropriate areas for new housing development? And so this is really, as I said, review from the last meeting, but it does form this backbone of the draft site inventory or the RENA plan that we'll be discussing at the rest of the meeting. So we identified these 5 bullets. We're really trying to look for sites that, based on our own experience, based on over the last at least 7 years that I've been here, obviously we've reviewed a lot of development proposals and projects. We understand a lot of the concerns. And so we've tried to embed those into this planning framework for housing opportunity sites. Limit vehicular traffic through local residential streets. So look for areas along commercial corridors near freeways that doesn't really draw vehicular traffic into our established residential neighborhoods, and areas that are, if possible, close to public transit. Minimize the physical impacts to existing residential neighborhoods and established residential neighborhoods. Obviously, those, we know the concerns about views and other construction, even in established residential neighborhoods. So we're trying to, where are some areas that aren't located in those residential communities and neighborhoods. There are some older sites, improve the appearance, productivity, and quality of existing properties. Obviously, if you do go through some of our commercial areas of town, there are look for properties developed with older commercial buildings, little recent investment, and are currently vacant. And so we actually had some property owners at the last workshop talk about this in their own properties in some of these commercial areas. Additionally, we spoke with John Steckley from the Village, who is Vice President at Macerich, and owners of the Village, or a significant portion of it. And really the trend now is to modernize and support commercial and retail, which, as we know, is changing rapidly, but support those commercial centers to take advantage of these trends and support more of a full spectrum of activities and a longer sort of timeline and a variety of businesses that sort of can operate throughout a day and evening. Consistent. And then the other thing, of course, we also want to be consistent with our existing land use policy to the extent possible. And we went through this at the last meeting. I mean, one thing to note for those that have some concerns is that we do have already our general plan allows for housing development of about 15 to 20 units an acre on most of the areas actually all of the areas we'll be talking about this evening. And And so I think it's really an important starting point there. And so these are the sites, again, going over what we talked about last meeting based on that criteria. Dave, if you can go to the next slide. Thanks. These sites numbered 1 through 9 here are really based on our own understanding of where development activity is likely to occur over the next decade. The criteria I just went over in the planning framework. We assembled the following list of potential opportunity sites for discussion and feedback at our last workshop. And we were definitely encouraged by the responses and feedback we received at that meeting. And actually following the meeting, we didn't have overwhelming participation in that, but we had about 65 responses to the survey. About half of those were taken in the last meeting, and then we got another 30 or 32 or so responses after that meeting. We also, and I'll get into this, we also contacted another 35 individuals at a pop-up workshop last week at the town center, where we asked sort of similar questions about, are these sites suitable? So we're really quickly, I just want to, because we've done this, I want to go through and just show everybody what the responses were of the 65 responses. And then we'll, the pop-up workshop skewed pretty much the same way. But Dave, can you go to the next slide? So we're gonna go site really quickly. Site 1, this is basically the on Tamalpais, the vacant mortuary. These were those responses. The blue and the red are blue is suitable, somewhat suitable. I mean, these are not scientific surveys here, but we're trying to get a sense of if we're going in the right direction or not. And so you'll see sort of consistent pattern here. The next slide, we're on to site 2, which is the former and vacant movie cinema site. It's a large site, 2 acres. Again, this might have, I think, received the highest percentage of actual blue category here. Next site, next slide. Site 3, this is actually across from Tam Ridge. In the back of that office development, there are 2 parcels. David, there's the red thing. There's those 2 sort of rectangular buildings and parcels. We went over the details of the site, but again, this is just for survey responses, mostly up to 80% combined when you do the suitable and somewhat suitable. Next. Pfeiffer Nellen, this is the big 5. Next door to it, the former medical building right off the highway. SF Fitness, again, go ahead, you can go to the next one. 5, this is on the other side of Black Kettle Lagoon at the very northern tip of Corte Madera. Similar results here as well. The Village at Macy's, also most support here. Obviously, we're at about 75% if you the blue and the red combined, a little bit more of the orange. Let me see if I have that. And now we're moving sort of south of on east of Highway 101 in the Paradise San Clemente area. This is one of the sites there. That is we're looking at essentially the brown sort of fields of the dog daycare and boarding facility behind the San Clemente apartments. Now we're at 8, a little bit further south, the Herc rental site. Again, these are all similar results. They're not exactly the same. And then the last one over site 9, which is the 5 Points Fitness. The town actually does own some small parcels adjacent to this gym in the parking lot. And combined, it's about an acre and a half. And you'll see a little bit more. Actually, this is, I think, the one that had the most orange on it as you move further into down Paradise Drive. And then again, this is just some images. We did also conduct a pop-up workshop. We were out at the farmers market last week. And really, it was a great opportunity. It was really nice to see people in person and talk. We talked with 35 separate contacts. The vast majority were actually from Corte Madera. I think we had about maybe 5 or so that weren't. But they really were similar responses and feedback as the results of the actual survey, the 65 other responses. The vast majority really believed that the sites we had identified were appropriate for housing development. So the next part of that, I wanted to give that background. You know, obviously what we take away from that we're not going to achieve 100% consensus on any, you know, but you know, we feel good that we're generally going in the right direction with these sites that we've identified, and that we should continue to utilize them for this housing plan, and trying to really now, as we turn to RHNA, use them as the sites that we should start to consider in meeting our RHNA requirements. So what I'd like to do is you know, go over essentially a look of how staff and how we went about the task of really trying to plan for and distribute 625 plus units of housing across these 9 sites. Taking into really account state law that we went over, the requirements related to the site inventory that Christine talked about in her presentation, but also importantly, taking into account the physical character of the sites themselves and their surrounding context, and the actual size and scale of buildings that would realistically need to be considered in order to make potential development on these sites add up to the required RHNA. So let's see, again, I think this is the category of that we're really focused on for the rest of the meeting. And so first, just our process and our methodology really was looking at the existing context surrounding these sites, the 1 through 9. What type of development already exists there on these sites, what is around them. And we sort of immediately saw that there were generally 3 different scales of density that could be accommodated on these sites based on the existing character of where these sites were located. Next slide. So the lowest scale really we looked at with these 9 sites was sites 1, 5, and 9, and we considered these to be essentially the should be considered lower scale. They're actually mostly adjacent to residential neighborhoods, if not immediately adjacent, then sort of embedded a little bit more in residential communities. And then we started to scale up a little bit. And these sites, 2, 3, 4, and 7 and 8, or color coding them orange to essentially note a little bit, maybe these can achieve a little bit higher density and a little bit bigger scale buildings. Mostly these are not tucked into residential neighborhoods. They're surrounded by other commercial buildings, larger buildings or of more significant scale, also generally closer to the highway. And then really the last site that we felt really could achieve the highest density of all the sites was at the village, given its location away from existing residential areas, the proximity to highways and transportation. We heard about the support such a development or residential community could provide the village going into the future and the retail center. And really also importantly, I think this is the largest parcel we have in Corte Madera to really work with of these 9 sites. It's about 7.5 acres. And so there is an opportunity to really plan and thoughtfully design a new community there. And also not insignificantly, it also allows us to meet a significant portion of our RHNA. Where is the place that we can actually locate the majority or significant portion of this 625 plus units of multifamily housing that we're going to need to find a place for. Obviously, and we'll go through this exercise. The more we can utilize a site like the village, the less sort of density and burden gets distributed to the other sites. So we saw this as a location really for an opportunity there. And so step number 2, let's start to use, our planners, we like tables, and just sort of methodically going through this. We started to use those color codes for the sites. On the left-hand side, you can see the yellow sites, 1, 5, and 9. The orange represents the medium, and then the red at the village and the Macy's site. And we included the lot sizes here just so you can get a sense of the relative. A lot of these sites are obviously very different in terms of how big the sites are. So we created a simple table. And importantly, we used the 20 units per acre as the minimum density for any of these sites. This goes back to what Christine was talking about, based on that, for us to count any of these sites toward our lower income and affordable unit requirements in RENA, 20 units an acre is the minimum we need to zone these properties for. It's worth noting that actually our general plan already allows 15 to 20 units an acre, as I mentioned before, on all these sites. So it's not really 20 units an acre is not much of a change from the existing general plan rules that we have in effect. And then we said, what's the top? What's the top end? What's going to be the highest? And we set that maximum density at 40 units an acre. That's the red site there for the Macy's site. Interestingly, if you go to 40 units an acre, that really comes out to right about 300 units, which is what is currently allowed at the village to be developed pursuant to the town's general plan, which was adopted in 2009. And noted, we noted that also this is also a recent example. We have a recent example of a housing project built at 40 units an acre. That is Tam Ridge. And we made the assumption essentially that would be sort of the upper limits of what we should consider for new housing development in town. So we have the lower and the upper, and now it was sort of, we didn't want to leave it at just a numbers game. So if you go to the next slide, what we also wanted to make sure we did is not just rely on and sort of make this about a numbers game, but we wanted to go the extra step, again, not only looking at just making the numbers work, but gaining a sense of what these densities could actually represent in terms of building size and scale at the various sites. So we actually utilized the services of Opticos Design, who was brought in to help test very conceptually. This is not a proposed development plan. This is actually looking at the cinema site, 41 Tamil Vista, site number 2. But we brought them in to help test conceptually what, for example, 30 units an acre might look like on this site. And Opticos, I think the results really were generally encouraging. So we had Opticos utilize the multifamily design standards that they helped us develop over the last 2+ years. And adopted by the Planning Commission and Town Council. And then in this example, we had them overlay also the town's MX1 zoning district, which we worked on for a couple of years or a year and a half back in 2016, which requires really smaller buildings opposite the single-family residential neighborhood across Tamil Vista Boulevard, and then allows for a larger building behind it to sort of hide the mass of the larger building, and allow larger buildings closer to the highway. This is a relatively deep lot. And essentially, they were able to create a sort of a medium size structures or size structures that were consistent with our zoning at 30 units an acre. So one thing to really note, though, and I think it's important to recognize, All these sites are in the floodplain, so really what you have is the residential units have to be pushed up over either parking or commercial uses, which are allowed. Those parking and commercial uses can be in the floodplain, but that essentially means that the buildings will generally be a story taller than if these sites were not in the flood zone. But even at that, they still work within what we've seen as sort of the type of development we see elsewhere in Corte Madera with 3 stories. If you're looking at the yellow in the back here, that's 3 stories over a parking podium. In the front, it's a 2-story building with obviously the more generous commercial floor-to-floor heights, and then a residential story above that. And here you're looking at a 2.1 acre site, 61 units, so it's about 30 units an acre. And again, this is just was done to test what sort of, if we say 30 units an acre, what are we potentially going to get in terms of a scale of building. So so as I mentioned, the scale and size of buildings at the densities we tested were consistent with the heights that you see in other multifamily residential development that exists throughout town. Some built more recently, some built relatively older, and certainly while there'll be larger buildings than that currently developed than currently exist on these sites, we still think they're compatible with the character and scale of the surrounding development in these areas and adjacent to these sites. So just for example, this is the lower scale sites 1, 5, and 9. This is sort of through our testing, the type of structures and scale of buildings we're likely to see at these sites. And again, I want to make this clear. These images are really just intended to give a general sense of scale. There's no proposals for these sites. These aren't intended to indicate these are the buildings that are going to get built at these locations, but really just general sense of stories and scale of structures. So next, Dave, the median density, 30 to 35 units an acre. We have several of these types of buildings throughout Corte Madera. Some of these images are just, we will see these again as we go into the breakout rooms. Lucky for you, we're going to put you through the same exercise that we've actually been through. And then you have the village, which really is a higher density. As I mentioned, we have Tamridge, which was built at 40 units an acre. The tallest buildings there, however, are really 3 stories above parking, 3 stories above commercial. We could see a range of different typologies. As I mentioned, it's a big enough site. You could have certainly commercial remaining. And as you see at the town center, there's already similar to what you see at the town center, where you have office above commercial, and you get sort of taller buildings in the center and maybe some smaller scale buildings around the edge. This is sort of then we sort of plugged in the chart and did these small scale, lower density, medium density, and highest density, plugged in, did the math. And you can see at the right-hand column there, this is the total unit count that we were able to get to. Importantly, the 690, obviously that's more than 625. One of the things to consider is that we have to prove, and Christine went over this, but just to reiterate, we do have to essentially prove with evidence to the state and HCD when we submit this, that these sites are likely to be developed in the next 8 years, or sorry, the next decade, as from today. Actually, yeah. And so things like, these are all existing sites, things like existing leases that extend beyond 2030 are going to be challenging to prove to HCD that those are likely to be developed. Some of these sites, in other words, may end up dropping out. And so we want to have more than the 625. We want to have some amount where we believe 690 is right about right, with which to, if some of these sites are not able to be sort that if we're not able to provide the evidence that HCD requires, that we have some buffer there to work with. And so that really the next part of what we're going to do, we're going to go into these breakout rooms, and we want to put, actually ask you the same questions we've been asking ourselves. So hopefully, Dave, I didn't go too long and we have enough time to, I think we've got enough time there.
No, I thought that was excellent, Adam. Thank you. That was really important to hear the town staff's kind of methodology of reaching these numbers. And as Adam mentioned, we'd like to now hear from you all and get your feedback on how this came to be, and the sites that we're looking at and the unit counts that we're considering. And just real quick before we jump in, I just wanted to remind you all, we're going to move into these small groups, your facilitators and note takers. You'll have one of each in each room. They're going to mute mics just so we don't accidentally talk over each other, and then use the hand raise feature if you want to contribute verbally, to contribute that way, and they'll go ahead and unmute you when it's your turn to speak. And you could use a chat window, as we've seen a lot of great questions coming in throughout Adam's presentation as well, a lot of which I think you'll delve into in the small groups. That'll be an opportunity to contribute that way as well. And what we have set up for you in the small groups is a virtual whiteboard. You'll see as you jump in there, set up exactly as you see here. This is one of the examples where you'll see all 9 sites that Adam just went through in great detail. And again, you'll see the approximate stories that the town is proposed, the approximate densities, and what the output of units would be per site. And then you'll have the opportunity to kind of talk through those numbers, whether those make sense. The example housing development sites that are really just there for scale and massing, as Adam mentioned, will be there as a reference. And then as you go through that exercise, we'll be taking notes, and then you'll see that to the right of the screen, there's a table that's tabulating your recommended units, so that you can again see kind of some of that push and pull that happens between the sites when we're trying to kind of reach that 600 to 700 unit count number. And then hopefully you'll have a great discussion, and we'll come back together after that to do a quick report out and talk through next steps, and then send you on your way, hopefully right around 8. We might be a little bit past 8 to give you a chance to really kind of delve in deeper. But hope you stick with us as we transition to the small groups. Unfortunately, as we typically see in meetings, I see a few folks have jumped off the meeting as we're about to transition to small groups. So I'm going to do a quick recalc here to make sure our groups are broken up evenly. And then we're going to send you on your way. So bear with me 1 second here as I move a few folks around. Great. And team, as you move into the small groups project team, if you notice that we do have a very small number in your group, as I still see some people jumping off, we could always transition back to the main room and have a larger discussion there if needed, just in case a few other people drop off as we transition here. But it looks like we have a good count of folks to be able to have a great discussion in each one of these rooms. So, yep. Go ahead, Adam.
So I just so I'm clear, I'm going to be sharing my screen now.
Yep. I'm going to stop sharing now. You're going to bring yours up, and then each of you will have a discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and open all the rooms. You all have a great conversation with your facilitators, and we'll see you back here shortly.
Thanks, Lynn. We're back as a full group. I really appreciate everybody's participation. Please, let's continue the conversation after this workshop. I'm not wrapping up as a whole, but just my group. We had a lot of interesting and some really good points. I'd love to follow up with you individually at another time, and available to do that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And I'm sorry if we cut any of the conversation short. I just really wanted to respect your time. We were shooting to close the meeting at 8 o'clock. If you all could indulge us and maybe stay on just another 5 minutes or so, it would be great to get a quick sense of just highlights maybe from each one of the groups. Facilitators, you want to just give us a quick sense of what you talked about? That would be great. Then we could talk through next steps real quick. Does that sound okay, Adam?
That sounds fine. Yeah, I think what there was a few commenters that had concern about traffic, and both on sort of Tamil Vista area, but also on Paradise Drive with units, additional units going over there. Some infrastructure concerns. At the same time, there was there's also some commenters who supported the direction on several of the sites that we had proposed. Site 1 and 2 was a little bit of a mix, but 3 and 4, etc. So we got some good comments and some good things to follow up on, and I'll leave it at that for now.
Great, thanks. Martha, do you want to give us a quick recap of your discussion?
Yes. We also had some concerns that were expressed a lot about traffic on Paradise Drive, with a lot of school traffic in the mornings, and obviously, new units could exacerbate that traffic. Generally, there wasn't any concern that was expressed with the densities recommended by staff. Several people commented that the density proposed at the Macy's site made sense given the location of that site. Also, Site 2, the Tamil Vista site, thought that was mentioned as being appropriate what was being proposed by staff. And in general, several commenters made comments that they thought the densities proposed for the sites in general made sense. There was some concerns with losing some of the industrial parcels on Paradise Drive, and making sure we have a place for those types of business are maintained in town. And then also some concerns about loss of property tax revenue.
Great, thank you, Martha. Christine, you want to give us a quick snapshot of your discussion?
Sure. We too heard some concerns about traffic, also availability of water and other services. The sites that we really looked at were sites 5 and 4. So there was some talk about the possibility of combining those sites and getting some community amenities. At one of the previous workshops, the property owner was talking about like having a community pool. So if there was, an opportunity to combine those sites and really make a really nice development, residential development with a community center, community amenities, that would be great. There was concern about like at the site 9 over near the Nugget Market about having about losing existing businesses and things like gyms that are already serving a purpose, and how could we ensure that those kind of existing uses continue. And also for that site in particular, a desire to just ensure that the scale and the architecture kind of blends in with the redevelopment that's already occurred there at the Nugget Market and at the Aegis development. We also heard some very positive feedback about the Macy's site. I think in general, there was a desire to just have fewer units kind of all around, of course, but probably pretty comfortable with most of the the densities that have been proposed by staff. Again, I think it was the sites 4 and 5 and 9 in particular that they really wanted to be sure that they were in the right scale and were providing community benefits.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you all again for your time and the great feedback. Before we leave here tonight, I would want to ask Adam to just take us through real quick.
Dave, I think you're muted.
Look at that, I am muted. That was bound to happen at some point in this meeting. I was just saying thank you all again for your great feedback and the time that you took with us here tonight. It was really, really helpful as we move this process forward. And I'm hoping I'm sharing my screen now, and I was going to ask Adam to take us through next steps as we work toward the next workshop.
Yeah, and this came up in our group, but certainly there are a lot of resources available. Again, I really encourage you, if you're interested in hearing more about the specific sites and why we identified them, and even hearing from some of the property owners themselves, the last workshop would be good for that. You can find all the videos of prior workshops at cortemaderahousing.org. What we're also trying to do is, as we hear these questions and concerns and comments, is also try to update our FAQs as we go along. And so we'll probably be updating that information on our website with some more detailed information about mitigation measures, maybe even traffic analysis, that the process. And actually, we did get into, is there going to be analysis? You can also tell us to, it seems like all of you made it here, so you've been getting notification in a good way, but you know, tell others, please participate and join and be aware of this process going on. The next workshop, we're going to be workshop number 5. We're going to continue this discussion. We're going to talk internally about essentially whether we should be refining this proposal, how to address some of the comments we've heard. And maybe we're also going to try to have a little bit more of, I believe the sort of the testing that we're doing in terms of building scale and character. For those that are interested in that, we're going to try to at least do a little bit more of that, maybe on some of the other sites, so you get a better sense of what potentially we're looking at is the the scale of these buildings at these sites. And then the next slide is really important as well. So we're now we're less than a year away from actually having to adopt, about a year away from having to adopt, or the town and the town council having to consider and adopt a housing element to be compliant with state law. So we have, we're at workshop number 4. Obviously, that's January 20. We have 2 more. The next one is really going to be where we try to finalize a proposal that we're going to move forward with in our planning process. And so it's really critical. We're basically going to be coming out of that meeting with a rezoning proposal that will rezone or propose to rezone certain parcels of property, and then start the environmental analysis after that, which is a lengthy process. As many of you know, the environmental analysis could take close to a year itself. Workshop 6 will explain that in more detail, and there will be plenty of opportunity to comment on the environmental analysis. We'll be working then throughout the spring on a draft housing element update, which will be available for public comment. And then you can see at the back end, obviously there's study sessions, hearings, et cetera, additional comments. We're trying to really generate a lot of attention at this part of the process so we can get concerns and comments addressed to the greatest extent possible. We understand there's going to, not everyone is going to be on board, but we also want you to understand what are the challenges that we actually have before us, and how we're trying to identify how to really create a plan that complies with the requirements of state law, and also one that really addresses some of the needs and issues that we've been talking about over the last several workshops in terms of developing new housing in appropriate locations that really try to avoid the impacts to the greatest extent possible and improve some of the properties that we have in town. So with that, I'll close. Thank you all for sticking around and past our 8 o'clock deadline. We look forward to seeing you next month. And again, please reach out to us in the meantime. This is all we like, we love talking about this stuff as much as it may seem awkward, but we're here to listen and also try to explain a little bit more and continue the conversation. Thank you.
Great, thanks all. Have a great night.